Master Sergeant Rachel Torres pulled her worn tool bag from the passenger seat of her old pickup truck and stepped onto the tarmac of Nellie's Air Force Base in Nevada. The morning sun was already fierce, reflecting off the rows of fighter jets that stretched across the flight line like silver birds waiting to soar. Rachel was 42 years old, with 20 years of service behind her. Her hands were calloused from decades of working on aircraft engines, and her dark hair was pulled back in a tight bun according to regulations. She had transferred from a smaller base in Texas, bringing with her a reputation that preceded her arrival, though not everyone had heard about it yet. The tool bag she carried had been with her since her first deployment. It was battered, scratched, and held together with duct tape in places. Some of the tools inside had belonged to her father, who had served in Vietnam as a helicopter mechanic. The bag wasn't pretty, but everything inside it had a purpose, and Rachel knew every wrench, every socket, every specialized piece of equipment like old friends. As she walked toward Hangar 7, where she'd been assigned, Rachel noticed a group of young airmen standing near the entrance. They were all men, probably in their early 20s, wearing crisp uniforms and confident expressions. When they saw her approaching, their conversation stopped. "Can we help you, ma'am?" one of them asked. His tone was polite but dismissive, the way someone might speak to a lost tourist. "I'm Master Sergeant Torres," Rachel said evenly. "I'm assigned to this hangar as of today, aircraft maintenance." The young man who had spoken exchanged glances with his companions. "You're the new mechanic." His eyebrows rose slightly. "We were expecting someone from the F-35 program." "That's me," Rachel confirmed. Another airman, taller with red hair, looked at her tool bag and smirked. "That's your kit. Ma'am, no disrespect, but we work on fifth-generation fighters here. That bag looks like it belongs in a museum." The others laughed, not cruelly, but enough to make their point clear. They didn't think she belonged here. Rachel had heard comments like this before, more times than she could count over her 20 years of service. In the beginning, they had stung. They had made her doubt herself. But somewhere around year 5, she had learned something important. Tools don't care what they look like, and neither do aircraft. What matters is the skill of the person using them. "This bag has served me through 3 combat deployments and more repairs than you've probably seen in your entire career," Rachel said calmly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do." She walked past them into the hangar, her head held high. Behind her, she could hear their muffled laughter and whispered comments. Let them laugh, she thought. They'll learn soon enough. Inside the hangar, the atmosphere was controlled chaos. The F-35 Lightning II fighter jets were marvels of modern engineering, stealth aircraft that cost over $80 million each. They were equipped with the most advanced technology the military had to offer, and maintaining them required extensive training and certification. Rachel had that certification. She had spent the last 2 years at a specialized school, learning every system, every component, every potential failure point of the F-35. She had graduated at the top of her class, but she knew that wouldn't matter to some people. They would see a middle-aged woman with an old tool bag and make their assumptions. The hangar chief, Chief Master Sergeant David Brennan, was a stocky man in his 50s with gray hair and a no-nonsense attitude. He spotted Rachel and walked over, extending his hand. "Torres, welcome aboard," he said. "I've heard good things about your work." "Thank you, Chief," Rachel replied, shaking his hand firmly. "I'll be straight with you," Brennan said, lowering his voice. "Some of the crew here are, let's say they're used to a certain type of mechanic. Young, fresh out of tech school, eager to prove themselves. You're not that." "No, sir, I'm not," Rachel agreed. "Good," Brennan said with a slight smile. "Because I don't need eager, I need competent. I need someone who knows what they're doing and won't panic when things go wrong. Your record says you're that person. Prove it and you'll do fine here." Rachel nodded. She appreciated Brennan's honesty. At least he was willing to judge her on her work, not her appearance. Brennan assigned her to a crew working on routine maintenance for 3 F-35s that were scheduled for training flights later that week. The crew leader was a technical sergeant named Marcus Webb, a lean man in his early 30s with sharp features and an attitude to match. When Brennan introduced Rachel to Webb's team, she saw the same skeptical look she'd received from the airmen outside. Webb looked her up and down, then glanced at her tool bag with barely concealed disdain. "Master Sergeant," he said, his tone professionally neutral but his eyes cold. We run a tight operation here. These aircraft are extremely complex. I hope you can keep up. I'll do my best, Sergeant, Rachel replied evenly. Over the next few hours, Rachel worked alongside Webb's team, performing standard maintenance checks. She inspected hydraulic systems, tested electrical connections, and examined engine components with practiced efficiency. She worked methodically, double-checking everything, following procedures exactly as they were written. The other members of the crew watched her work with a mixture of curiosity and doubt. They were waiting for her to make a mistake, to prove that she didn't belong among the elite mechanics who maintained these sophisticated machines. But Rachel didn't make mistakes. She had learned long ago that in her position she couldn't afford to. Every task she completed was done correctly, every measurement precise, every connection secure. Still, she could feel their judgment like a weight on her shoulders. During lunch break, she sat alone in the break room, eating a sandwich she'd brought from home while the younger crew members clustered together at another table, talking and laughing among themselves. She overheard fragments of their conversation. They were talking about her. Probably got promoted through quotas. Can't believe they're putting her on the F-35s. That tool bag is a joke. Rachel finished her sandwich in silence. She had learned not to let words hurt her, but that didn't mean they didn't register. Every slight, every dismissive comment, every doubtful look, they all accumulated like small cuts. Individually, they were nothing. Together, they formed a weight that she carried every single day. After lunch, the crew returned to work. Rachel was assigned to assist with a landing gear inspection on one of the aircraft. It was detailed, tedious work that required patience and attention to every small component. As she worked, Technical Sergeant Webb stood nearby, watching her with his arms crossed. He didn't offer to help, didn't provide guidance, just watched, waiting for her to fail. Rachel didn't fail. She completed the inspection thoroughly, documenting every finding according to protocol, and moved on to the next task. By the end of her first day, Rachel was exhausted, not from the physical work, but from the constant scrutiny, the unspoken judgment, the feeling that she was an unwelcome intruder in a space where she had every right to be. As she walked back to her truck that evening, tool bag in hand, she saw the same group of young airmen from that morning. They watched her leave, their expressions unchanged, still skeptical, still dismissive. Rachel placed her tool bag in the passenger seat, started her truck, and drove toward the base housing where she'd rented a small apartment. Tomorrow would be another day, another chance to prove herself. She had done it before at every base, every assignment, every new crew. She would do it again here. 3 weeks passed, and Rachel settled into a routine at Nellie's Air Force Base. Every morning, she arrived early before most of the crew. She would walk through the hangar, checking on the aircraft, familiarizing herself with each one's quirks and history. Every evening, she left late, after ensuring all her work was properly documented and secured. Her work was flawless. Chief Brennan had noticed, and he made sure to mention it during team meetings. But praise from the boss didn't change how most of her crew treated her. They remained distant, professional, but cold, still waiting for her to prove she deserved to be there, as if 3 weeks of perfect work wasn't proof enough. Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb was the worst of them. He seemed to take personal offense at Rachel's presence, assigning her the most tedious tasks, watching her work with eagle eyes, searching for any mistake he could report. Rachel understood men like Webb. He saw her as a threat, though she couldn't quite figure out why. Maybe he thought she was after his position, or maybe he simply couldn't accept that a woman could be as skilled as he was at this work. On a Tuesday morning in late September, the routine changed dramatically. Rachel was in the hangar performing a pre-flight inspection on an F-35 designated as Lightning 307 when alarms started blaring throughout the base. The sound was distinctive, 3 short bursts followed by a long tone. It meant one thing: scramble alert. Within seconds, the hangar transformed into controlled chaos. Pilots came running from the operations building, already pulling on their flight gear. Ground crews rushed to prepare aircraft for immediate launch. Chief Brennan's voice boomed across the hangar, directing traffic and coordinating the response. "We've got a situation developing off the coast," Brennan announced. "Unidentified aircraft approaching restricted airspace. We need 4 F-35s flight ready in 30 minutes. Webb, get your team moving." Technical Sergeant Webb immediately began barking orders. "Johnson, Martinez, get Lightning 304 prepped. Anderson, you're on 309. Tours. He paused, looking at Rachel with an expression that mixed urgency with his usual disdain. Just stay out of the way. Rachel bristled but said nothing. She moved aside as the crew rushed past her, each mechanic assigned to a specific aircraft. She stood near Lightning 307, the plane she had been inspecting, feeling useless and frustrated. 4 aircraft needed to be ready. Webb had assigned mechanics to 3 of them, but no one was preparing the 4th, Lightning 311, which sat in the far corner of the hangar. "Chief," Rachel called out to Brennan, "what about 311? Brennan looked over, his face creased with stress. 311 came back from a training flight yesterday with a system fault. We haven't diagnosed it yet. We'll have to make do with 3 birds. "What kind of fault?" Rachel asked, already walking toward the aircraft. "Primary flight computer is showing errors," Brennan replied. "Could be the computer itself, could be a sensor issue, could be a wiring problem. We don't have time to troubleshoot it." Rachel reached Lightning 311 and quickly accessed the aircraft's diagnostic panel. Her fingers moved swiftly across the interface, pulling up error codes and system logs. Her mind raced through possibilities, running through the thousands of hours of training and experience she had accumulated over 2 decades. Behind her, she could hear Webb's voice. "Tours, what are you doing? Chief said that bird is down." "I'm looking at the problem," Rachel replied without turning around. "We don't have time for you to play around," Webb snapped. "Get back to your station." Chief Brennan walked over, his expression tense. "Tours, what do you see?" Rachel studied the diagnostic display, her eyes scanning lines of code and system status indicators. The error logs show intermittent signal loss from the angle of attack sensor, but the sensor itself is reading normally right now. That suggests the problem isn't the sensor, it's the connection. "The connection?" Brennan frowned. "That could be anywhere in the system. We'd need hours to trace those lines." "Not necessarily," Rachel said. She closed the diagnostic panel and grabbed her tool bag. On the F-35, the angle of attack sensor feeds through a junction box located behind the nose gear door. If there's vibration or stress during flight, a loose connection in that box would cause exactly this kind of intermittent failure. Webb laughed harshly. "That's your diagnosis. A loose wire. These are 5th-generation fighters, Tours, not cars from the 1950s. Rachel ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside the nose landing gear and opened her tool bag. From inside, she pulled out a specialized panel removal tool that her father had modified years ago. It looked ancient, wrapped in electrical tape, but it was perfectly designed for accessing tight spaces. "Chief, with your permission, I can check that junction box and resolve the issue in less than 15 minutes, Rachel said. Brennan looked at his watch, then at the activity around the hangar. 3 aircraft were being prepped, but 4 would be better. 4 would provide the air superiority they might need if the situation escalated. "Webb, what do you think?" Brennan asked. Webb's jaw tightened. "Chief, I think we should focus on the 3 birds we know are operational. We can't risk a pilot's life on a guess from someone using tools from the Stone Age." Rachel felt anger flash through her, but she kept her voice steady. "It's not a guess, Sergeant. It's experience. I've seen this exact failure mode on F-35s twice before, once in Texas and once during a deployment in Okinawa. Both times it was the junction box connection. Both times the fix took under 20 minutes. Brennan made his decision. "Do it, Tours, but if that bird isn't ready in 15 minutes, we launch with 3. "Yes, Chief," Rachel said. She didn't wait for Webb's response. She removed the nose gear door panel with swift, practiced movements, then reached into the tight space beyond with a small flashlight clenched between her teeth. The junction box was exactly where she knew it would be, mounted against the airframe in a position that was almost impossible to access without the right tools and technique. From her bag, Rachel pulled out a flexible inspection mirror and a right-angle driver. Both old, both worn, both perfectly suited for this job. She could feel Webb standing over her, watching, probably hoping she would fail. Around the hangar, the activity continued at a frantic pace. She could hear Chief Brennan coordinating with the pilots, ground crews shouting updates, the whine of auxiliary power units starting up on the other aircraft. Rachel blocked it all out. Her world narrowed to the junction box in front of her, the beam of her flashlight, and the connections she needed to check. She found the angle of attack sensor line immediately, The connector was seated but not secured. The locking tab had worn down, allowing the connection to vibrate loose during flight. "Found it," she called out. From her tool bag, Rachel retrieved a replacement connector, standard issue, but one she always kept in stock because she knew from experience that these particular connectors had a failure rate higher than the manufacturer admitted. She disconnected the faulty connector, installed the new one, and secured it properly with the locking mechanism fully engaged. Then she traced the entire line by hand, checking every connection point, every support bracket, ensuring nothing else was loose or damaged. Satisfied, she reinstalled the access panel, closed her tool bag, and stood up. "All set, Chief," Rachel announced. "You can run diagnostics." Brennan immediately ordered one of the younger airmen to power up the aircraft systems and run a full diagnostic check. The crew gathered around the diagnostic panel, watching as the systems initialized and ran through their self-checks. The error code didn't appear. Every system showed green. The flight computer reported all sensors operational and within normal parameters. Chief Brennan looked at Rachel with something close to amazement. "How long did that take?" One of the airmen checked his watch. 12 minutes, Chief." A murmur ran through the assembled crew. Rachel saw expressions changing, surprise, respect, and in Webb's case, something darker, resentment. "Outstanding work, Master Sergeant," Brennan said firmly. "We've got our fourth bird. Get it ready for the pilot." Rachel nodded and immediately began the pre-flight inspection, moving with practiced efficiency. Within 3 more minutes, she had Lightning 311 ready for takeoff. The pilot, a captain named Sarah Chen, came jogging over, already in her flight suit and helmet. The scramble turned out to be a false alarm. The unidentified aircraft were civilian planes that had strayed off course due to a navigation error. But the 4 F-35s had been ready to launch in under 30 minutes, exactly as required. Chief Brennan made it clear in his debrief that having that fourth aircraft available had been crucial for the mission's success. Master Sergeant Torres identified and repaired a critical system fault in 12 minutes, Brennan told the assembled crew that afternoon. "That's the kind of expertise and quick thinking we need on this team. Outstanding work, Torres." Rachel accepted the praise with a simple nod. She wasn't looking for glory, she had just done her job. But she noticed how the other crew members looked at her differently now. Some with respect, some with curiosity, and some, like Technical Sergeant Webb, with barely concealed hostility. After the debrief, several of the younger airmen approached Rachel hesitantly. "Ma'am, that was impressive," said Airman Johnson, one of the crew members who had laughed at her tool bag on her first day. "I've never seen anyone diagnose a problem that fast." "Experience," Rachel replied simply. "You learn the patterns after a while." "Could you maybe show us sometime?" asked another airman, Martinez. "Like how you knew where to look." Rachel felt a warmth spread through her chest. This was what she had been hoping for, not just acceptance, but genuine interest in learning. "Anytime," she said. "That's what Master Sergeants are for, passing on what we know." But not everyone was pleased with Rachel's success. Over the next few days, she noticed Webb becoming increasingly difficult. He would reassign her tasks at the last minute, criticize her work in front of others over minor issues, and generally make her life as challenging as possible. One afternoon, Rachel was working on a routine inspection when Webb approached with 2 other technical sergeants, men who seemed to share his attitude toward her. "Torres, we need to talk," Webb said, his voice low but hard. Rachel set down her tools and turned to face him. "What's on your mind, Sergeant?" "That stunt you pulled with Lightning 311, Webb said. "That was reckless. You made a field diagnosis without proper testing, without following established procedures. You got lucky, that's all." Rachel kept her expression neutral. "I followed my training and experience. The repair was successful. The aircraft was deemed flight-ready by the pilot and performed perfectly." "This time," Webb shot back. "But what about next time? What if you're wrong, you're cutting corners, Torres, and it's going to get someone killed?" One of the other technical sergeants nodded. "We have procedures for a reason. Just because you've been doing this for a long time doesn't mean you know better than the manual." Rachel felt her patience wearing thin. She had dealt with men like this throughout her career, men who felt threatened by her competence, who couldn't accept that she might actually be better at this job than they were. "I have never in 20 years of service cut corners on safety," Rachel said, her voice steady but firm. Every repair I make is by the book. The only difference is I know which book to use and when to use it. If you have a specific concern about my work, file a formal report. Otherwise, we're done here. She turned back to her work, dismissing them. She could feel their anger, their frustration, but she refused to engage further. She had learned long ago that arguing with men who had already made up their minds was a waste of time. That evening, Rachel was in the break room filling out paperwork when Captain Sarah Chen, the pilot who had flown Lightning 311 during the scramble, walked in. "Master Sergeant Torres," Chen said warmly, "I've been hopping to catch you." "Ma'am," Rachel replied, standing out of respect. "At ease," Chen said with a smile. "I wanted to thank you personally for getting 311 ready. That bird flies like a dream. Whatever you did it right." "Just doing my job, Captain," Rachel said. Chen leaned against the counter, her expression becoming more serious. "I heard Webb's been giving you trouble." Rachel hesitated, then nodded. "Nothing I can't handle." "I'm sure you can," Chen replied. "But you should know that the pilots talk. We all know what happened that day, and we know who the reliable mechanics are. Your name comes up a lot in a positive way. Webb's doesn't." This surprised Rachel. "I appreciate that, ma'am." "There's something else you should know," Chen continued, lowering her voice. "There's a major inspection coming up next month. Big brass from Washington, evaluating the whole F-35 program at Nellie's. They're looking at maintenance efficiency, readiness rates, everything. Chief Brennan is under a lot of pressure to make sure we look good." "I understand," Rachel said. "What I'm saying is, this is going to get more intense before it gets better. Webb knows that inspection is coming, and he's worried. He's had some incidents in his past. Nothing major, but enough to make him nervous when scrutiny increases. He's going to look for someone to blame if things go wrong, and right now, you're an easy target." Rachel felt a chill run down her spine. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're a good mechanic, and we need good mechanics," Chen replied. "And because I've been in the Air Force long enough to know how this works. Women like us, we have to be twice as good to get half the respect. You've proven you're more than twice as good. Don't let Webb's insecurity take that away from you." After Captain Chen left, Rachel sat alone in the break room, thinking about what she had learned. She had suspected that Webb's hostility was about more than just her gender or her old tool bag. Now she knew there was more to the story. The next few weeks were tense. The entire hangar crew felt the pressure of the upcoming inspection. Chief Brennan pushed everyone harder, demanding perfection in every task. The maintenance schedules became more intense, with aircraft being inspected and re-inspected to ensure everything met the highest standards. Rachel worked longer hours than ever, often staying late into the evening to double-check her work and help the younger airmen with their tasks. She became an unofficial mentor to several of them, teaching them tricks and techniques she had learned over the years. Airman Johnson, who had once laughed at her tool bag, became particularly interested in learning from her. He would watch her work during breaks, asking questions about diagnostic techniques and repair procedures. "How do you know where to look?" he asked one day as Rachel troubleshot an electrical issue on one of the aircraft. "You learn to listen," Rachel explained. "Not just with your ears, with your hands, your eyes, even your nose. Every system has its own signature, its own way of telling you what's wrong. The flight computer gives you codes and data, but sometimes the answer is in the small things. A slight vibration, a faint smell of burning insulation, a connection that looks normal but feels loose." "They don't teach that in tech school," Johnson observed. "No," Rachel agreed. "They can't. This comes from experience, from making mistakes and learning from them, from working on hundreds of aircraft until you start to understand them not just as machines, but almost as living things with their own personalities." As the inspection date approached, tensions in the hangar reached a breaking point. Webb became increasingly aggressive, criticizing everyone's work and creating an atmosphere of fear and resentment. Several crew members made mistakes under the pressure, which only made Webb angrier. Then, 1 week before the inspection, something happened that changed everything. Rachel was performing a post-flight inspection on Lightning 307 when she noticed something unusual. The aircraft had just returned from a routine training flight, and according to the pilot's report, everything had performed normally. But as Rachel ran her hands along the engine intake, she felt something, a slight irregularity in the housing, almost imperceptible, but there. She grabbed her flashlight and looked closer. There, hidden in the shadows of the intake, she saw a small crack in the composite material. It was tiny, barely visible, but Rachel's heart sank when she saw it. This was serious, potentially catastrophic if not addressed immediately. She documented her finding and immediately reported it to Chief Brennan. "Are you sure?" Brennan asked, his face grave. "Absolutely certain, Chief," Rachel replied. "That crack could propagate during flight. If it fails completely, we're looking at engine damage at minimum, possibly loss of the aircraft." Brennan ran his hand over his face. "This is bad timing. That aircraft was scheduled for a demonstration flight during the inspection, with a two-star general in the cockpit." "Better to find it now than during that flight," Rachel pointed out. "Agreed," Brennan said. He called over Webb and several other senior mechanics. "We've got a problem." When Webb saw Rachel's finding, his expression changed from concern to something else, suspicion. "That's a maintenance-induced crack," he said slowly. "Someone overtorqued the housing during the last inspection." The conference room at Hangar 7 was cold and institutional, with fluorescent lights that hummed constantly and a long table surrounded by uncomfortable chairs. Rachel sat at one end, her hands folded calmly in front of her, even though her heart was pounding. Across from her sat Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb, Chief Master Sergeant Brennan, and a lieutenant colonel from the Inspector General's office named Patricia Morrison. On the table between them lay a thick folder containing maintenance records, inspection reports, and photographs of the cracked engine intake housing on Lightning 307. "Master Sergeant Torres," Lieutenant Colonel Morrison began, her voice professional and neutral. "You're here to answer questions regarding your maintenance practices on F-35 Lightning 307. You're not being charged with anything at this time, but we need to understand what happened. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Rachel replied. Morrison opened the folder. "According to Technical Sergeant Webb's statement, the crack in the engine intake housing appears to be maintenance-induced, specifically caused by excessive torque applied during reassembly after a recent inspection. The last documented inspection of that housing was performed by you 3 weeks ago. Is that correct?" Rachel's blood ran cold. She had performed that inspection. It was routine work, nothing unusual about it. But now Webb was claiming she had damaged the aircraft during that inspection. "I did perform an inspection on that aircraft 3 weeks ago, ma'am," Rachel confirmed. "But I followed all proper procedures. The torque specifications were met exactly as they always are." Webb leaned forward, his expression grave but with a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Master Sergeant Torres has a habit of using non-standard tools," he said. "That old tool bag of hers contains equipment that isn't properly calibrated or certified for F-35 maintenance. It's possible, probable even, that she used an improperly calibrated torque wrench, which would explain the overtorque condition that caused this crack." Rachel felt anger flash through her, but she kept her voice steady. "My tools are all properly calibrated and certified. I have calibration certificates for every piece of equipment in my kit, all current and up to date." "Can you produce those certificates?" Morrison asked. "Absolutely, ma'am. They're in my locker. I can retrieve them immediately." "We'll need to see them," Morrison said. She made a note in her file. "Sergeant Webb, what makes you believe the crack was caused during that inspection rather than developing naturally over time or during flight operations?" Webb pulled out several photographs. The location and characteristics of the crack are consistent with stress fracture from overtorque. Additionally, Master Sergeant Torres has a documented history of unconventional repair methods. During the scramble last month, she performed a field repair without following standard diagnostic procedures. She got lucky that time, but this suggests a pattern of cutting corners. Rachel couldn't stay silent. "I have never cut corners. That repair on Lightning 311 was performed correctly and the aircraft flew perfectly. Captain Chen can confirm." "Captain Chen isn't a maintenance expert," Webb interrupted. "She's a pilot. She wouldn't necessarily know if a repair was done properly or if you just got lucky." Chief Brennan had been silent until now, but he spoke up. "Torres has a spotless record, 20 years without a single maintenance-related incident. I find it hard to believe she would suddenly start making mistakes now." "With respect, Chief," Webb replied, "everyone makes mistakes eventually. Maybe the pressure of working on the F-35 program with the inspection coming up got to her. Maybe she rushed the work. It happens." Morrison closed the folder. Here's what's going to happen. Master Sergeant Torres, you're suspended from maintenance duties pending investigation. You'll provide all calibration certificates for your tools, and we'll have them independently verified. We'll also review all maintenance records for every aircraft you've worked on since arriving at Nellie's. If we find any other irregularities, this will become a formal investigation. Rachel felt the world tilting beneath her. Suspended. After 20 years of perfect service, she was being suspended based on the accusation of a man who had resented her from day one. "Ma'am, I request permission to inspect the crack myself," Rachel said. "If there's something I missed, I want to understand what happened." Morrison considered this. "Denied. You're too close to the situation. We'll have an independent team examine the damage." The meeting ended, and Rachel walked out of the conference room feeling numb. As she passed through the hangar, she could feel everyone watching her. Word had already spread. The rumor mill on a military base was faster than any official communication. She went to her locker and pulled out her tool bag. Inside, in a carefully organized side pocket, she kept all her calibration certificates in a waterproof folder. Every single tool that required calibration was documented, when it was last certified, by whom, and when the next certification was due. Everything was current. Everything was proper. But as Rachel looked through the certificates, a terrible thought occurred to her. What if someone had tampered with her tools? What if Webb or someone else had deliberately damaged one of her torque wrenches to make it look like she had made a mistake? She examined each tool carefully, checking the calibration seals and looking for any signs of tampering. Everything looked normal, but Rachel knew that a skilled mechanic could manipulate a torque wrench without leaving obvious evidence. That evening, Rachel sat in her small apartment off base, staring at her phone. She should call someone, her sister in California, maybe, or one of her old friends from her previous assignments. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. How could she explain that after 20 years of perfect service, her career was falling apart based on false accusations? Instead, she pulled out her laptop and started going through her own maintenance records. Every inspection she performed, she documented thoroughly, more thoroughly than required, actually. It was a habit she had developed early in her career when she realized that as a woman in a male-dominated field, her work would be scrutinized more carefully than anyone else's. She pulled up the maintenance log for Lightning 307, the aircraft with the cracked housing. She had performed the inspection on September 15th, 3 weeks ago. She had documented every step, every measurement, every torque specification. According to her records, she had used a calibrated torque wrench, set to exactly 45 inch-pounds as specified by the technical manual, and had applied the proper torque to each fastener. But something in the records caught her eye. After her inspection, there had been another maintenance action on Lightning 307, a minor repair to the radar system, performed just 2 days later. The mechanic assigned to that task had been Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb. Rachel's mind raced. Webb had access to the aircraft after her inspection. He would have been in a position to inspect her work, to check the engine intake housing, and if he had wanted to make it look like she had made a mistake. But that seemed crazy. Would Webb really sabotage an aircraft just to discredit her? The risk would be enormous. If the damage had caused a crash, people could have died. Webb was arrogant and resentful, but was he that reckless? Rachel spent hours that night going through records, looking for any pattern or evidence that might support her theory. But there was nothing concrete, just suspicions and circumstantial connections. The next morning, she received a call from Chief Brennan. His voice was somber. "Torres, the independent inspection team found something," he said. "The crack in the housing, it's not just overtorque. There are tool marks consistent with improper installation. The fasteners were cross-threaded before being tightened." Rachel's stomach dropped. "Chief, that's impossible. I checked every fastener carefully. They were all properly aligned before I applied any torque." "I believe you," Brennan said quietly, "but the evidence is pretty damning. Morrison is recommending a full investigation and possible court-martial proceedings." Court-martial, the word hung in the air like a death sentence. Rachel's career, her reputation, everything she had worked for over 20 decades, all of it could end in disgrace. "There's more," Brennan continued. "Webb has filed a formal complaint stating that you've been hostile and insubordinate toward him since you arrived. He's got 2 other technical sergeants who are backing up his statement." "That's a lie," Rachel said, her voice shaking with barely controlled anger. He's been hostile toward me from day one. He's the one who's been. I know, Brennan interrupted. I know, but it's his word and two other sergeants against yours, and with the maintenance issue, it looks like he might have a point. After the call ended, Rachel sat in her apartment, feeling more alone than she had in years. She thought about her father, who had taught her to love aircraft, who had given her that old tool bag and shown her that tools were just extensions of your hands and your mind. He had died 5 years ago, but she could still hear his voice. Rachel, when people doubt you, you don't argue. You show them. You do the work, and you do it better than anyone else can. But how could she show them now? She was suspended, under investigation, facing the possibility of a court-martial. How could she prove her innocence when all the evidence seemed to point to her guilt? That night, unable to sleep, Rachel drove back to the base. She couldn't enter the hangar. Her access had been suspended. But she sat in her truck in the parking lot, staring at the building where she had worked for the past 2 months. Inside that hangar was the truth. She was certain of it. Somewhere in the maintenance records, in the evidence, in the aircraft itself, there was proof that she hadn't made that mistake. But she needed to find it before the investigation destroyed her career. As she sat there, watching the night shift mechanics coming and going, a figure approached her truck. It was Airman Johnson, the young mechanic who had laughed at her tool bag on her first day, but who had become one of her most eager students. "Ma'am," he said, looking nervous, "I shouldn't be talking to you, but I wanted you to know something." "What is it, Johnson?" Rachel asked. "That day you did the inspection on Lightning 307, Johnson said, glancing around to make sure no one was watching. "I was working on the aircraft in the next bay. I saw you do the work. I watched you because I was trying to learn your technique." Rachel's heart began to race. And you did everything right, ma'am. I saw you check every fastener, saw you use the torque wrench properly. There's no way you cross-threaded those fasteners. I'd stake my career on it." "Would you be willing to testify to that?" Rachel asked. Johnson hesitated, fear clear in his eyes. "Ma'am, if I go against Webb and his friends, I'm just an airman. They could make my life hell." "I understand," Rachel said gently. "I wouldn't ask you to put yourself at risk." "But there's something else," Johnson continued. "2 days after your inspection, I saw Webb working on that same aircraft. He was at the engine intake, the exact location where that crack is now. I didn't think anything of it at the time because he was supposed to be working on the radar, but now." Rachel's theory was starting to look less crazy. "Did anyone else see him?" "I don't know, ma'am. It was late in the day. Most of the crew had already left." After Johnson hurried back to the hangar, Rachel sat in her truck, her mind working through the possibilities. If Webb had sabotaged the aircraft to frame her, he had taken an enormous risk. But maybe he thought the risk was worth it. If he could get rid of her before the inspection, he would eliminate someone who made him look bad by comparison. But how could she prove it? She needed evidence, and she had been suspended from access to the hangar and the aircraft. Then Rachel remembered something. The F-35 had multiple camera systems for pilot assistance and maintenance documentation. Some of those cameras recorded to the aircraft's data storage system. If Webb had been working on the engine intake, there might be footage. But accessing that data would require clearance she no longer had. Rachel made a decision. She pulled out her phone and called Captain Chen. The morning of the inspection arrived cold and clear, the Nevada sun just beginning to warm the tarmac at Nellis Air Force Base. Major General Robert Caldwell, a decorated pilot and the current Air Force Assistant Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, stood on the flight line with his entourage, watching as the maintenance crews performed their final checks on the F-35s that would be part of the demonstration. Inside Hangar 7, Chief Master Sergeant Brennan was a bundle of nervous energy, overseeing last-minute preparations. The inspection team had been reviewing maintenance records for 2 days, asking pointed questions about procedures, readiness rates, and safety protocols. Everything had gone smoothly so far, but Brennan knew that one mistake, one oversight, could reflect badly on the entire program. Technical Sergeant Marcus Webb stood near the front of the hangar, wearing his dress uniform, looking confident. He had prepared a presentation on maintenance innovations his team had implemented, and he was ready to impress the general. With tours suspended and under investigation, Webb felt like he had finally cleared away the obstacle that had been undermining his authority. What Webb didn't know was that Captain Sarah Chen had spent the last 3 days working behind the scenes, pulling strings that she shouldn't have been able to pull, accessing data that she shouldn't have been able to access. When Rachel had called her and explained her theory, Chen had been skeptical at first. But something about Rachel's certainty, combined with Chen's own observations of Webb's behavior, had convinced her to investigate further. Chen had used her pilot's access codes to pull the maintenance camera footage from Lightning 307's data storage system. Footage that was technically supposed to be reviewed only during accident investigations, but which pilots could access for training purposes. The footage showed the interior of the engine intake from multiple angles, recorded automatically whenever maintenance panels were opened. What Chen found on that footage had made her blood run cold. Now, as the inspection team prepared to meet with General Caldwell, Chen stood in Lieutenant Colonel Morrison's temporary office with a laptop computer and a grim expression. "Ma'am, I need you to see something before the demonstration begins," Chen said. Morrison looked up from her paperwork, irritated. "Captain, I'm very busy, if this isn't urgent." "It's urgent, ma'am. It concerns Master Sergeant Torres and the Lightning 307 incident." Morrison's expression changed. She gestured to a chair. "Show me." Chen opened the laptop and pulled up the footage. "This is from Lightning 307's maintenance camera system, recorded on September 15th at 14:30 hours, the date and time of Master Sergeant Torres' inspection." The footage showed Rachel working on the engine intake housing with meticulous care. Chen narrated as they watched. "You can see her checking each fastener for proper alignment before installing them. She's using a calibrated torque wrench. You can see the calibration sticker clearly. She applies exactly the specified torque to each fastener, then uses a torque adapter to verify the setting. Everything is textbook perfect." Morrison leaned forward, watching intently. "This appears to exonerate Torres." "Wait, ma'am, there's more." Chen fast-forwarded the footage to September 17th, 2 days later. "This is when Technical Sergeant Webb performed his radar system repair." The footage showed Webb working on the radar, as his maintenance log indicated. But then, after completing that work, Webb did something unexpected. He moved to the engine intake housing, the same area Rachel had inspected 2 days earlier. Chen slowed down the footage. "Watch carefully, ma'am." In the video, Webb removed several fasteners from the housing, examined them, then reinstalled them. But something was wrong with how he did it. Even Morrison, who wasn't a trained mechanic, could see that Webb was deliberately cross-threading the fasteners before tightening them. "He's sabotaging the installation," Morrison said, her voice shocked. "He's deliberately creating the appearance of improper maintenance." "Yes, ma'am," Chen confirmed. "And there's more. Watch what he does next." The footage showed Webb using a tool, not a standard torque wrench, but something else, to stress the housing around the fasteners. He was deliberately creating the conditions that would lead to the crack that had been discovered weeks later. Morrison sat back in her chair, her face pale. Captain, this is sabotage of a military aircraft. This is a court-martial offense, potentially treason." "Yes, ma'am, and he framed Master Sergeant Torres for it." Morrison immediately reached for her phone. "I need to stop this demonstration if that aircraft flies with that damage." "The aircraft has already been repaired, ma'am," Chen assured her. "The crack was discovered before any flights occurred, but General Caldwell is scheduled to meet with Webb in 15 minutes to hear about the maintenance program's successes." Morrison's jaw tightened. "Not anymore, he's not." 20 minutes later, the atmosphere in Hangar 7 had changed dramatically. General Caldwell stood in the center of the hangar with Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, Chief Brennan, and a full security detail. Technical Sergeant Webb had been summoned from his preparations, confused about why the schedule had suddenly changed. "Sergeant Webb," General Caldwell said, his voice carrying the authority of decades of command, "I've just been shown some very disturbing footage from Lightning 307's maintenance camera system. Do you have anything you'd like to tell me before we discuss what that footage shows?" Webb's confident expression began to crack. "Sir, I don't know what you're referring to." "Don't compound your mistakes with lies, Sergeant," Caldwell cut him off. "We have video evidence of you deliberately sabotaging maintenance work on a combat aircraft and framing another service member for your actions. This is beyond serious." Webb's face went from confusion to fear to anger in rapid succession. You don't understand. Torres doesn't belong here. She's been undermining my authority since the day she arrived." She makes everyone else look bad with her showboating and her ancient tools and her superior skill, Captain Chen interjected, stepping forward. Her 20 years of perfect service, her ability to diagnose and repair problems in minutes that would take others hours. Is that what you mean? Webb glared at her. She's a woman playing in a man's world thinking she can. That's enough, General Caldwell's voice boomed across the hangar, silencing Webb instantly. Sergeant, you are hereby relieved of duty and placed under arrest pending court-martial. Security, take him into custody. As the security personnel moved forward to detain Webb, he looked around frantically. The two technical sergeants who had supported his accusations against Rachel stood nearby, and Webb pointed at them desperately. They knew they were part of it. I told them what I was going to do, and they agreed someone needed to get rid of her. The two sergeants' faces went white. General Caldwell turned to them slowly. Is this true? He asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Neither sergeant answered, but their silence was answer enough. Take them all into custody, Caldwell ordered. I want a full investigation into every maintenance action performed by these three individuals. Every aircraft they've touched needs to be reinspected immediately. As security led Webb and the others away, Caldwell turned to Chief Brennan. Where is Master Sergeant Torres? Off base, sir, Brennan replied. She's been suspended pending investigation. Get her here, now. I want to apologize to her personally for what she's been put through. Rachel received the call 30 minutes later while she was sitting in her apartment, staring at the wall and wondering if her career was over. Chief Brennan's voice on the phone was almost jubilant. Torres, get to the base immediately. You've been completely exonerated. It was Webb. He sabotaged the aircraft and framed you. It's all on camera. Rachel drove to Nellie's in a daze, barely believing what she'd heard. When she arrived at the hangar, still in civilian clothes, she found herself facing a two-star general, surrounded by her crew, with Captain Chen standing nearby wearing a satisfied smile. General Caldwell extended his hand to Rachel. Master Sergeant Torres, I owe you an apology on behalf of the United States Air Force. You've been wronged in a way that is inexcusable, and I want you to know that we will make this right. Rachel shook his hand, still processing everything. Thank you, sir. I just want to get back to work. Caldwell smiled. You will, but first I'd like to hear about your background. 20 years of service, perfect maintenance record, multiple deployments. Why haven't you been promoted to Senior Master Sergeant? Rachel hesitated. This was a question she'd asked herself many times over the years. I've been told, sir, that my leadership style doesn't fit the traditional model, and I've been passed over several times in favor of other candidates. Other candidates who weren't as competent but were more politically savvy, Caldwell asked bluntly. I wouldn't put it quite that way, sir, Rachel replied diplomatically. I would, Caldwell said. Chief Brennan, I want Master Sergeant Torres' promotion packet on my desk by the end of the week. She's exactly the kind of senior NCO we need in the F-35 program. Over the next few hours, the truth came out in full. Webb had been facing disciplinary action at his previous assignment for poor maintenance practices. He had transferred to Nellie's hopping for a fresh start, but he knew he was on thin ice. When Rachel arrived with her stellar reputation and superior skills, Webb had seen her as a threat to his position. He had sabotaged the aircraft hopping to discredit her before the inspection, believing that if he could get her removed from the program, he would be safe. The two technical sergeants who had supported him had their own reasons. One had been friends with Webb since tech school and had gone along with the plan out of misplaced loyalty. The other had his own issues with women in the military and had been happy to see Rachel fail. All three men were court-martialed. Webb received a dishonorable discharge and prison time for sabotage of military equipment. The other two received lesser sentences, but were also discharged from service. In the weeks that followed, Rachel's life changed dramatically. The story of what had happened spread throughout the Air Force maintenance community. She received calls and messages from women at bases across the country, other female mechanics who had faced similar discrimination and were inspired by her vindication. Her promotion to Senior Master Sergeant came through within 2 months. Chief Brennan retired shortly after, and Rachel was selected to take his place as the new hangar chief, making her one of the highest-ranking female maintenance supervisors in the F-35 program. The young airmen who had once laughed at her tool bag now sought her out constantly for guidance and mentorship. Airman Johnson, who had risked his career to tell Rachel what he'd seen, received a commendation for his integrity and was fast-tracked for promotion. But the most meaningful change came in the culture of Hangar 7 itself. With Rachel as chief, the focus shifted from politics and appearances to competence and teamwork. She instituted a mentorship program that paired experienced mechanics with newer ones, regardless of gender, rank, or background. The only criteria that mattered were skill and the willingness to learn. 6 months after the incident, on a cool spring morning, Rachel stood on the tarmac watching a flight of F-35s take off for a training mission. Captain Chen walked up beside her. "You know," Chen said, "I've been flying fighters for 12 years, and I've worked with a lot of maintenance crews. I've never seen a group work together as smoothly as yours does now." Rachel smiled. "They're good people. They just needed someone to show them that the old ways of doing things, the politics, the discrimination, the boys' club mentality, those things don't make us stronger. They make us weaker." "Speaking of old ways," Chen said with a grin, "I noticed you're still carrying that same tool bag." Rachel looked down at the battered bag at her feet with its duct tape repairs and worn straps. "I am, you know why." "Why?" "Because every scratch, every mark, every piece of tape on this bag tells a story. It reminds me where I came from and what I've overcome to get here. Plus," Rachel added with a wink, "the tools inside still work perfectly, and that's what matters." As the two women watched the aircraft disappear into the morning sky, Rachel thought about her father, who had given her that tool bag so many years ago. He had told her that tools were just extensions of your hands and your mind, but he had taught her something even more important, that your worth isn't determined by what others think of you, but by the quality of your work and the integrity of your character. She had faced discrimination, doubt, and outright sabotage. But in the end, the truth had prevailed, not because she had argued or fought, but because she had simply kept doing her job with excellence, day after day, year after year, until even those who doubted her couldn't ignore her competence. The young airmen working in the hangar behind her, men and women, all races and backgrounds, all learning to be the best mechanics they could be. They would face their own challenges and discrimination. But now they had an example to follow, a proof that excellence and integrity could overcome prejudice and politics. Rachel picked up her tool bag and walked back toward the hangar. There was work to be done, and as always, she would do it better than anyone expected. Because that's what master sergeants do. That's what leaders do. That's what she did. And no one was laughing at her tool bag anymore.